What's up, my Nimbugs? Do you all understand how stupid that intro is, by the way? It's a reference to, like, the single Elestrals video that Nim made, which makes sense because his name is Nim, like Nimbugs. But they're just saying it. They're just saying it. It's a reference to something. No one understands this reference. Anyway, hope you're having a good day, my Cracker Tukas. Today, we're going to talk about Elestrals. I mean, obviously, this is Elestrals channel. Let's talk about Elestrals. So, if you're unfamiliar with me, hi. My name's Joseph Rothschild, aka MBT, and I am sort of a co-worker of the Elestronauts, and I'm using the word almost there to refer to a couple of videos I made a little while back about Elestrals. After those videos did okay, I ended up playing in the Elestriad where I got second place. Now, clearly all of the other people on this channel have already drank the Kool-Aid when it comes to Elestrals, so I thought it would be interesting to give my perspective as someone who is still a little bit on the fence about the future of the product. I want to talk pretty extensively about how I feel about Elestrals and my experience with the product, the things that I like, the things that I dislike, the good signs for the future of Elestrals, and the bad signs. So we'll begin with my experience. So I was not one of the individuals who got on board with this thing because I watched a lot of Pokemon content. No, my showdown days are far behind me now. As a result, my first interaction with Elestrals was making a promotional product as part of the Broke Boy series of videos a couple of years ago. While playing with those sealed cards was fun, I couldn't help but feel like the product was fundamentally unfinished. A lot of things needed to be changed and tuned and improved. A couple of months ago, I was invited to participate in the Elestriad, and since then, I've spent a pretty substantial amount of time playing Elestrals in almost all its forms. Sealed deck, constructed, and that's it. I'm not playing the app. I'm getting this all out of the way so you can all know I'm not exactly an objective observer. I'm not a ride or die for this product, but I did cut a commercial for it a couple of years ago. Which leads me to how I feel about Elestrals now. I think, no exaggeration, this game has what it takes to be a part of the big three. Hold. I am not saying that I think that it will, or even that it's particularly likely to do so, but I think the skeleton of Elestrals is a strong enough foundation that in the best of all possible worlds, this could be a thing that you see at LGSs. Which brings me to... Seems like a pretty obvious transition after saying something like that to immediately start talking about the things I like about the product. The first and most important part of the game is it's built different. It's easy to see a lot of the design elements in Elestrals and then immediately equate them to similar design ideas found in other TCGs. Spirits are kinda just mana from Magic. They're even colored. A spirit deck is a concept that Force of Will played with. Ascending is sort of just evolving from Pokemon. The positions of each individual card in the combat step are pretty analogous to Yu-Gi-Oh! And the back row is just trap cards. However, the mechanism by which each of these design elements differ from their analogs in other card games is how they interact with the resource system. The Spirit deck is super cool. Certainly, Elestrals isn't the first game where you use some portion of your library as your life total, but the way that it's integrated into the entirety of the card game means that it feels like the most important thing in the world, which is something that almost no other card game can say about their life system. It's super sick to try and manage all at the same time, a board state which you aim to be winning, card advantage over your opponent, and enough spirits that you can continue to cast cards after your opponent can't. It's even got, in my opinion, one of the most genius card designs in any card game ever, Ambrosia. Do you understand how hard you have to work to get me excited about a life gain card? It's so cool that this card eats a card slot, which is incredibly valuable, gains you 3 life, which seems exceptionally negligible, and is like arguably one of the best cards in the game. Its existence means that you never feel truly out of any game, even the ones where you're getting absolutely steamrolled. It's peak, and the whole game is designed around it. I also like deck types. One thing that I think a lot of nascent card games just sort of fumble out of the gate is deck types. We've all seen enough progression series to know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically looked like Gemini Elf attacking Overlodge in the Mystical Genie of the Lamp for a pretty long time. And while the Elestrals that are included in the first couple of sets are pretty simple, they do facilitate some deck types that really scratch pretty much every itch that card gamers might have. As an example, Coders won a couple of tournaments with a deck that plays a card called Viserys. It's this super aggro Earth beatdown deck, which aims to play a card that is, in essence, Shore of the Blue Flame. That deck is all but countered by Pen Terror, a toolbox deck that aims to use the exceptionally powerful Wind Divine rune in order to pivot through a whole host of extremely powerful Wind Elestrals, including Hydrake, which can convert to a 13-8. Then in the margins, you've got this Towers Turbo combo style deck in Volt Tempest, which aims to make a huge guy your opponent can't kill by assembling a really powerful combo and then just burning them to death over the course of a couple of turns. Finally, it's arguable that the best deck is just this little pile of synergies a la Tengu Plant that can just, over the course of several turns, engineer a board state where they're able to Thought Seize you and Pot of Duality at the same time. This is the first set. There's even stall burn. It's nice to notice there's probably not going to be a multi-year period where you just compare attack stats against each other. I also like the pace of play. I spoke about this a little bit in the spirits section, but it feels good that both players feel in the game pretty much the entire time in a meaningful way. Turns aren't too long, but they're also not too simple. You're making decisions pretty much the entire time you're playing. And finally, the last thing I appreciate is how each individual game feels different. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Has painted itself into a corner in which pretty much every deck has one super accessible combo that they're able to get off at the start of every game, it can be hard for games to feel anything but samey. Elestrals is still in a position where different games play out in different ways based on what you draw and how you play. That rocks. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Here are some things that suck. The first and most important one of these is, unfortunately, counter runes. So counter runes are Elestral's version of trap cards, and unfortunately, they're really good. I imagine this is going to change as additional sets get released, but right now, a significant amount of decks begin by playing like 14 of the same counter runes. There's like a Trap Hole, a Compulse, a Forbidden Chalice, and because the quality of individual Elestral is so low compared to that back row, there's pretty much no reason not to load up on them. Because there's a mulligan system, you can play around this to a degree. You almost always want to ship back hands that don't include some number of counter runes, for example, but it does mean that deck building can often feel very constricted, as you feel you have to evaluate each individual slot against these 13 or 14 must plays, and it means a significant amount of games begin with this weird standoff where you both set 3 back row, and then you like try to push through individual back row one at a time until you actually start playing the game. On the topic of cards that absolutely warp deck building, aDrive. This guy's in everything. There was probably always going to be a best Elestral, and they could have done a lot worse than this guy, but this card is still incredibly frustrating to play against. In almost every deck in the format, it's the most powerful turn 1 play you can possibly do, slapping this guy in defense, dualitying, and then setting 4. He immediately threatens a response because you could theoretically just enchant him again on your next turn and duality again, overwhelming your opponent in card advantage. But spending removal on this guy really sucks because he's already paid out with an individual card. It kind of feels like a Skull Clamp situation where this guy was like clearly supposed to have 4 toughness, and then 10 seconds before the product shipped, they were like, bump it up to 5. What's the worst that could happen? I know the Skull Clamp analogy was a little confusing, but I do want to impress. This card's not like broken. It's not ruining the game. It's just the best Elestral, and it's a defensive one, so it incentivizes a type of play that begins by just sort of staring at your opponent for a little bit. And finally, distribution. So right now, playing constructed Elestrals is really difficult. There's one booster set, and then a whole bunch of starter decks aimed at getting you started on playing. Except there are cards in the starter decks that aren't found in the booster box. So as a result, if you want to be playing the best cards at any given opportunity, you have to buy a combination of the booster box, which contains some cards that aren't found in the starter decks, and the starter decks, which contain some powerful must plays that aren't found in the booster box. This sucks. By the time you're advanced enough to put together a competent deck, it shouldn't feel like you have to buy like more copies of introductory product in order to do so. This happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! Too, but I don't like that either. All those things aside, I really like the game and have a ton of fun playing it. But that doesn't really mean a lot. Sure, I can enjoy the game, but that doesn't mean that it's going to have a lasting impact unless a couple of things happen. Thankfully, here are some good signs. Firstly, the secondary infrastructure that is absolutely necessary for a TCG to thrive is already being developed. Individual YouTube channels like the one that you're watching now with big budgets behind them are of course an integral part of a thriving community, but also access to cards is super important. Right now, Elestral's cards are not listed on TCG Player, which is the mechanism by which a lot of people in the United States are able to get individual cards. However, there are other options. There's a Discord where you can hop on and do buy-sell posts, or if you prefer the impersonal online shopping experience, like I do, a significant number of sellers have set up an eBay auction page that they have configured in such a way that you can drop down to the individual card you want to purchase from them and then purchase that number. It's like a whack-ass TCG Player from one seller total. But there's enough of these that at present it's not super hard to find cards, which is good. I'm also really impressed by the team behind this game. Just by virtue of being around Elestrals a lot, I've been present a significant number of the times that they announce a person that they are working with. And far and away, the people they've been working with are the right people. aDrive and his team have been consulting like legitimate industry leaders, not only in card design, but also individuals with extensive experience building an IP, judging. I'm not talking about Coder here, by the way. I'm talking about like real judges, magic judges, and distributors as well. Just by virtue of inhabiting the card game space for as long as I have, I'm really excited to see some of the names that are attached to this product. They instill me with confidence a lot more than like rotation. And finally, I am really impressed insofar as they are doing a lot of work to build the IP of Elestrals. I'll get into this a little bit more in a moment, but I think the make or break for a card game like this is if you can get individuals organically interested in the IP. Your card game can be the best shit on planet Earth, but if people don't have a pre-existing connection to the IP, it's really hard to move those first couple of packs. And even if the game sucks balls, if the IP is strong enough, people will still purchase them. I mean, how long did Super last? Look at attendance at One Piece tournaments. I have never seen a single person play a game of Weiss Schwarz in my life, and yet every single LGS has the fucking HoloLive cards out. The time the team is taking to make the Elestrals IP seem alive is arguably more important than all the time they spend designing and playtesting put together. It is just as important that people find a reason to purchase a plushie of Nimbug as they do to actually purchase the cardboard. Which brings me to my last section. So there's a lot going for Elestrals already. It's fun to play for people who enjoy all different deck types, it's easy to learn, it's hard to master, games play out differently, and you have fun the entire time, but there are some scenarios in which none of that shit is going to matter. These things have to happen if Elestrals wants to be taken seriously as a competitor to the big three, and it's going to begin with their ability to market to LGSs. This one sucks. At present, I really can't get anyone interested in Elestrals because you can't go anywhere to buy the cards. I know that there's already a distribution model planned for OTSs and big box stores, and while that is absolutely important and must happen in order for Elestrals to take off, there are going to be some roadblocks. I know a significant amount of LGSs aren't going to be too keen on picking up a new card game right after the most recent one failed. My LGS, for instance, went almost all in on MetaZoo, and it just about cost them their building. The team's going to have to make a pitch to LGSs not only to carry their product, but also that their product is fundamentally different than the dozens of other fly-by-night card games that release every year. There is no shortage of Kickstarter card games that have absolutely failed. To that end, they're going to have to be super aggressive at incentivizing in-person tournament play. This one is going to be a disaster. But without consistent opportunities for in-person play around you, no card game can survive. You get into kind of this circular logic where you can't fill seats until people experience the card game, but people can't experience the card game until you fill the seats. There have to be large-scale events like YCSs where people can play Elestrals against the best of the best, but there also have to be small-scale events where you can play Elestrals with some of your friends in a weekly setting. And getting LGSs to run these is going to be near impossible. Some of them aren't hosting Lorcana locals. Lorcana, the Disney card game. And the final one, I know I've spoken about it already, but they absolutely must build the IP. Almost every successful card game in the history of time has been inextricably linked to a strong fundamental IP. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, DBS, One Piece, Digimon. All these have associated shows which kind of establish a floor on the game. Even if it sucks absolute ass, some people are just going to purchase the product because they like the way it looks. I made fun of them already, but Weiss Schwarz is basically just IP the card game. Elestrals is starting at a pretty fundamental disadvantage when it comes to the IP. To my understanding, Magic the Gathering is pretty much the only card game with any sort of longevity that's gotten away with this, and they mostly did it because there weren't really card games yet. And even now, they're just scraping other IPs. They have the fucking Fortnite series. Even a significant amount of those Kickstarter card games that had to build their own IP from scratch were still starting somewhere. Like MetaZoo's about cryptids. Everyone knows who Mothman is. No one's ever heard of a Zaptor. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands of people willing to play and put up with a dog shit card game provided they know some of the people on the pieces of cardboard. Is the My Hero Academia game still going? Earlier I said that the team is doing a pretty good job of building out the IP, but I do want to drive home. This is not something that could happen and make Elestrals better. This is something that must happen or Elestrals will not take off at all. So that's where I land. It is a little heartening that most of the things that I think are fundamental issues with Elestrals don't have anything to do with the card game itself. I think it's cool, engaging, fun, and interesting. I'm just scared about its potential relative to distribution and events. Despite all that, I have incredibly high hopes for the product. And if you do too, it'd help out if you'd sub. That's it. See ya.